Welcome to the Lara Jane Layton Show. This podcast is for you, the person who keeps putting others first. Your self-talk has held you back. You no longer need to take a second seat. Let's explore ways to overcome self-doubt. You can silence that inner bully voice and achieve your full potential. Here's your host, Lara Jane.
All right. Hello, listener. It is your host, Lara Jane, and I'm so excited to introduce my new best friend. Her name is Angela. Angela is an expert at teaching people how to manage stress and dealing with trauma. She's a licensed therapist, so I am so excited to have her here with us to help shine the light, because I know as we are working so hard every day in our daily job and bringing home the money and cooking the bacon so everybody can eat, it's a huge task. And I want to call it burden, but it's all done with love. It's all done because we love it. And one of those ways of managing stress is also framing it in a way where you're seeing the benefits instead of all the have-tos. And so I'm just really excited to talk with Angela here. And I'm going to, all her information, her bio, how to get a hold of her are in the show notes. So you can jump down there now or at the end of the podcast. But Angela, talk to us about managing stress, and wherever else we go with this is just fine.
I love that frame that you put on it. We could call it a burden, or we could say that it's done with love. That's so important.
It helps me to reduce the stress when I realize I'm doing this because I want to, and I'm choosing to, instead of waking up every day as I have to.
And as someone who, you share on your website, you went through some trauma, you know how important it is to change that mindset and have at least something to look forward to, give yourself some hope.
Yeah. How do we find, if someone hasn't been in that mindset for a while, how do we start identifying that hope and those ways of reframing to get away from the stress cycle?
That's a really good word, reframing. I usually like to start any kind of therapeutic relationship with motivation. So what's your motivation for doing this? And I think it's important not only for like that day, but also because as you go through therapy or any kind of coaching relationship, there will be days where you're like, I don't want to do this. Should I just quit? And so talking about motivation at the beginning, you can carry that with you the whole time. Why do you want to change your life? Why are you doing this? Why did you enter counseling in the first place? And this could look like symptoms, like, what kind of, for example, PTSD symptoms or depression symptoms do you have? It could also look something like, who am I doing this for? Is it for me, for my kids, for my loved ones? Have they told me I have a problem? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. I have one of my brothers recently came out as a narcissist. Now, I have never seen that before, but looking at the things that him and his family are going through and stuff, it's like he's really having to focus on his why, really getting down of, I just don't need to look good. I just don't need to always be right. But what is my why for existence? And I think once we find that, and you had mentioned for yourself, for your family, for your whatever. And I agree that, what's the quote? I want you to have the best of me, not the rest of me. And like, I don't first take care of me. If I don't first put on my own mask, then I can't really take care of you. Now, sure, I can go through the motions, I can do things, but I'm not giving you the best of what I have to offer, because there's not the best of me left to even offer anybody. So once we reframe and find our why, really, really hope that a lot of you, or that you come back with that, it's me. I am the why. And if your why is your family, why is it your family? Because they bring you joy? It's like, it's technically still you. It's like, so how do we get to that why and narrow it or boil it down to the things I need to do, because you cannot change the external world. There's nobody you can change. That it's not going to happen. We can only change our response. So how do we get to that why where it's deep enough that our responses can start changing also?
I know. And I always ask people, first session, usually, or second session, I'll say, what about your life is going to change if you do this treatment? And I think it's important to kind of nip it in the bud, because a lot of people come in and they're not sure, and that's fine. And we know it's a part of the therapy process that for many people, you can read this in studies, it takes more than one round in treatment, especially for depression, to see progress. So maybe this is just the first round. This isn't the one that's going to like create meaningful change for you. And so I like to help people identify that off the bat. So what in your life is going to change if you do this? And sure enough, yeah, you do get people who come in and they're like, I'm really second guessing it. I'm not sure I'm ready to start creating the kind of change this is going to take. That's fine. We know that's part of the journey. I used to work in addictions, and it's a part of the addiction process is a relapse. That's just the way it goes. You're not a failure. That's part of it. So a lot of people get to that point where it's like, I'm not ready to change this. I thought I was, not this time. So I ask that. I also like asking, how will this change, for example, treating your trauma? How will this change your relationship with other people in your life? Because think about it, your whole life might be kind of created to accommodate what you're going through. There might be people who help you. And if you don't have trauma symptoms, they won't help you anymore. If you have a knight in shining armor, they won't be a knight in shining armor if you don't need them. Are you ready for that? Like, is that something you're ready to talk about?
Oh my gosh, that is so true. That, it kind of like takes me back to, okay, this is going to take some transparency and some vulnerability to even admit. But when I was going through my really bad health problems, and this is going to sound mean, but for the first time, I 100% knew I was unconditionally loved by my husband. Like all of everything came out, and his fear of losing me was so strong that he was there. And I actually was afraid to get healthy because I felt so unconditionally accepted at the time for exactly who I was, that, oh no, if I'm healthy, maybe that will go away. So I love that point that you put, is like, it's kind of scary to make that switch.
I talk with a lot of young adults who will be like, having I specialize in PTSD and trauma. Having PTSD is a part of my identity. Like Angela, I go home and I'm in Discord groups for people who have PTSD. I'm in Twitter groups. My social media profile says I have PTSD. How is my life going to change if this is no longer a part of my identity? Like, will I lose all those groups and friends? Like, can I still be in my trauma groups if I don't have trauma anymore? I'm like, I don't know. I can't answer that for you. Like, do you still want to do this?
Yeah, because I would be the PTSD survivor, or what they call it, the workaholic, recovering workaholic. It's like, I've recovered, but I still know the pain. I still know what it can do. I still know those trigger points that will just throw people just out the door. Like all of a sudden you lose all rational mind because of this fear intense that takes over. And people will still believe you. I think that's the part, is like, well, if I don't have it, how am I supposed to remember? You're not going to totally forget. And that is one of the nice things that keeps us in the why, because they do not want that trigger anymore.
I think another important aspect of this is looking at what's called a systems perspective. So a lot of times, especially for overworked, high functioning, high achieving individuals, their entire system of their life is built around them being a high achiever. So like you take like a common presentation is someone who's like the breadwinner in their family and they work extremely hard. Maybe they're not the sole breadwinner, but it's an important part of their identity that they're a provider. And maybe they have kids or they caretake for other people. So obviously a part of like stress management work is going to be like, well, you have to do less at some point. And it might mean challenging the very crux of their identity, which is like, well, I'm a caretaker. What do you want me to do? Stop being a kid. Like that's who I am as a person. And their whole life system is set up like this, where the people in their life expect them, or maybe they only think they expect them. Spoiler alert. Maybe there's not as much pressure as they put on themselves. They truly believe like people won't love me or value me if I'm not this high achieving professional anymore.
Oh, yeah, I'm so with you. And I really thought, I honestly thought that work was what drove me. The expectation of work of this needs to be done by tomorrow, or I need to have this deadline and you've got 40 hours to do a 60-hour job and you just work, and you just give it 100 and every ounce that you have to this. And I honestly thought it was work. I thought that I had, give them what they expect and then they'll expect more. It's that constant, oh, well, she's willing to work 50 hours. So let's give her a little bit more because it's going to get done. And I honestly thought it was them. And then when I retired and chose to do my own thing, guess what? It didn't go away. I still wake up early. I still am at my desk all day long because I love doing it. But I'm doing it now for me instead of somebody else. But yes, it is 100%. It's just who you are, but the symptoms are showing in your work environment or your symptoms are showing in your household environment. And caretakers are wonderful. But you need to remember that you also need to be taken care of. And you've got to put yourself in the mix because when you don't, that's when other things start to fail. Your relationships with your spouse, if you're not taking care of yourself, is going to go downhill. Unless you're lucky like me and you fall flat on your face and you're in the hospital and your husband loves you even more. I know he didn't love me more. I all of a sudden let down these are the reasons he doesn't like it. It was my mind that did the change.
That kind of brings me to my first tip for stress management. I think the first thing everyone has to do is you need to learn how to feel your emotions again. And where I usually start with this is the emotion of anger, because I find that it's one of those emotions you just can't repress. Even people who think they've done a really good job of repressing all emotions will still feel angry. They'll still feel capable of like being angry at something. So I usually start there with like, what makes you angry? And the most common response I get from people is, I'm not even kidding you. They'll be like, I realize that I am angry all the time. I'm probably angry every single day.
Wow. Oh, that would be hard. That would be, I think at the times when I'm angry and it's usually lashing back at something that didn't go my way, like my way is the only right way, right? And you start fighting that and that anger. How I could not do that 24 hours a day. I would definitely be locked up.
It's a reality for a lot of people. I think a lot of high achievers. The thing about anger, though, is I think anger is probably one of the most useful emotions because it tells you when someone has crossed one of your boundaries. It's, the little friend next to you that's like, hey, buddy, you're not okay with that. Like this thing your boss said to you, giving you 60 hours of work for the 40-hour work week, that's not okay with you. And anger is telling you that you're not okay with that. It's like your body's internal red flag. And it's very important to listen to anger. If we separate anger from the consequences of anger, consequences of anger might be unhealthy, like, violent outbursts or, verbally abusive, whatever. But just the emotion of anger is very useful for letting you know when you're not okay with something. And I think a part of managing stress is you need to get back in touch with telling when your boundaries have been crossed, right? Because, step 2 is we have to set new ones. So step 1, identifying when your boundaries have been crossed and which ones need to be stronger.
So if it is, I'm trying to think, almost all of them is that boundary. And I'm sure as I think through it, it's going to be 100% of them. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just thinking about those triggers that send me to that frustration or angry mode. And I would say some of them, I didn't even know I had a boundary. It's like, oh, yeah, I was expecting this. And so they did cross my boundary and I didn't even think about it. So how you said the next step is setting new boundaries, but I don't want to give up that part of me. How do you set new boundaries and still be authentic?
Great question. So I guess there's like a little half step in there where I'm like, before we take any work around boundaries, we need to talk about self-sabotage, because people who don't feel emotions and people who are high achievers are like black belts in self-sabotage. I am sure that like every high achiever I've ever worked with has tried to stop, being an overworker, overachiever before, and it's failed. And so the way we do that is we look at underlying beliefs that will eventually encourage them to self-sabotage. Some common ones, just to give some examples, are like, I don't believe I'll ever be a success, or everything I do, I just believe I will fail at it, so there's no reason to try, or I don't ask for help because I believe I'm just going to get judged. And the way you unpack these beliefs, so asking for help is like almost a universal one among people who are high achievers, is like, okay, what are the advantages of this belief? Because you wouldn't continue to believe it if it wasn't true. So some examples of the advantages of believing, like, if I ask for help, I'm going to get rejected, is most obvious. Number 1, well, if you believe that, then you don't ever have to ask for help. You don't have to believe you're a burden. You don't have to believe you're being annoying. You don't have to potentially experience rejection. So there's a lot of advantages there. And we have to call those out, because if we're going to convince you they're not true, we have to recognize them. So some obvious disadvantages of that same belief around, asking for help, I'll get rejected, are obviously you never get the help you need. You could be doing this, going through what you're going through with support, but you don't get it. You could have your family behind you, but you don't have it. You're really missing out a lot, right? And so we need to at least begin to convince you that it is adaptive to ask for help before we start to set whatever boundaries we're going to set. So we go through all those, right? I guess I'm kind of curious, though, in your experience, do you ever work with clients who have those kinds of self-sabotaging beliefs?
Oh, yes, we do. I think that self-sabotaging is definitely a character in all of us. Because, if I fail, because to me, it's kind of that wall in between you harming where I'm most vulnerable and where I feel comfortable with you crossing that line. And it's like, it's kind of that, I'm going to keep this wall up, so if I fail, it's your fault. And because you didn't trust me, but I didn't ask for help. So yes, and I think a lot of it, and I go into that bully voice, that negativity that replays in our mind, and how do we switch that out to be our best friend voice? We don't want to get rid of that support system we have. We want it to be our friend. We want it to support us. And these are our thoughts. And if we don't feel we're good enough, that's our fault. That's like, if nobody else is telling us that, look at some of the happiest people in this world are not the ones trying to be liked for their achievements, not trying to prove that they're likable. They're just okay with the way it is. And yeah. So yes, that was a long-winded yes. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to have a word from our sponsor, and we'll come back out. I want to get back into this. Here's our boundary, and how does that self-sabotage affect where we set that boundary? So we'll be right back.
This podcast is sponsored by Lara Jane Coaching. You know you're ready to silence your inner bully voice. Let Lara Jane support you with coaching. To schedule an introduction call, go to larajanelayton.com.
Oh, listener, we're back. And I am so excited because I've been thinking about this during the break and going, how is my self-sabotage? Because we all do it, right? It's just something that happens. It's easier to fail on purpose than to try your hardest and fail. Because then that bully voice tells us we're not good enough. So how do we get back to that, changing that self-sabotage that affects those boundaries of what we let other people cross?
Right. So the self-sabotage is like a constant work I believe you need to do in the background while you're doing everything, right? I usually start when I talk with people about boundaries. I like differentiating between boundaries and rules. So it's kind of a semantics difference, but I believe it's important. So rules, if you guys haven't heard this before, rules are like rules you make for someone else. So I'd say like, just to set an example one, Laura, you're not allowed to be mean to me anymore. And that's not going to be a great rule because I have no way to stop you from being mean to me. And I have no way to punish you if you are mean to me. So that's not going to go very far. Boundaries are rules you make for yourself. So it would be like, if Laura's mean to me, what am I going to do about it? And my boundary might be like, if Laura's mean to me, I'm going to end the conversation. I don't want to engage with Laura when she's mean to me because, it makes me feel bad. Does that make sense? The difference between those two things?
Yeah, I'm liking it. That's a great way to put it. It is that, how am I going to react? That's changing that reaction to an actual response where I've been able to pre-think about this and come back with a better response. And somebody was telling me the other day, I was trying to explain it. They're going, you're shitting all over yourself. And I went, what? And he says, you are setting that should. My meal at the restaurant should come out exactly like I want it. The people driving down the road should be following the rules, except for me, I want to speed. No, it was like, it's those boundaries that we have absolutely no control over. It is somebody else's free will, and you can't change that. So I love that you're saying we need to change our response.
Because that's all you have control over. It's a tenet of existentialism. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that you always have control over your own responses and your own beliefs about things, even if you're completely helpless in all other areas of your life. So to go back to the earlier example, when your boss tells you, you're going to have 60 hours of work in the 40-hour work week, figure it out. You're in control of how you respond to that. I like one boundary I'll commonly set with people, because I believe you have to start small, is I'll be like, just set a boundary that you don't agree to anything without thinking about it first. Be like, don't agree to anything. I need at least 2 minutes to think about it. And that one just makes such a huge difference, because I feel like, especially for people who are caretakers, there's such an impulse to say yes. But if you take 2 minutes, you can like compose your thoughts better and be like, do I really want to take this on? Do I need to get out of this? Am I okay with taking this on? How do I let this, you can go through the process of like, how do I tell this person I actually can't take on more right now?
That's really critical. And at the same time, I find for me, in the moment, I am all in. And because I'm only thinking about you and me and the situation at the time, for me, I need overnight. I need to be able to go, okay, where's the rest of my life fit in on this? Because so many times I've jumped both feet in and then had to back out because at the time I wasn't thinking about the rest of my life, just this one little tiny situation. And so if you need overnight, take overnight. It's like 2 minutes is great, but it's okay to go even more if you need it.
Oh yeah. I'll like rehearse with people in session. Like, what is going to be the phrase that you say? Cause you have to have one ready when people ask you for something, practice saying, I need a second to think about this, or can I get back to you tomorrow? Whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, I love it. And one of the things in one of my episodes that before is the way my granddaughter responded to me at one time when she didn't want to do something I suggested. And I loved that it's not my interest. It's just not my interest. And I went, what better way to say it? I think that sounds wonderful, but I've got to think through all the other things that are going on and I'll get back with you. So pre-planning that response is an amazing idea. Hadn't even thought about it, but it's definitely one that I know I have some pre-planned responses for because I use them. It's like, I can't tell you that answer right now.
I'll also practice, because again, high achievers, caretakers, saying no can be really hard. So of course we have to talk about assertive communication versus passive communication. For me, I say assertive communication always starts with I want or I need. That's it. It's short, sweet, to the point. And in my experience, most people would prefer to receive assertive communication. I need you to do the dishes, as opposed to, if you have some free time, if you don't mind, I feel like that kind of builds resentment. But I'll also practice with people saying no. Like if someone asks you to do something and you have to say no, like let's practice doing it. And you'd be amazed how many people are like, oh, I hate this. I really can't do it. Maybe I can just find a way to accommodate rather than saying no. I really don't like how this feels in my mouth.
I think we're also programmed that no is not acceptable in certain situations. I mean, think about saying no to a school teacher. Think about saying no to a parent. You feel it's not socially acceptable. You don't say no. And it is definitely where we have to unlearn that behavior of saying yes, because it's definitely a learned response.
And it's a hallmark of psychotherapy going all the way to the beginning with Freud and the early psychoanalysts was feeling your own body and your own body's responses. And I don't mean that literally. Some people take it literally. I mean like emotional responses and like body sensations that go along with emotions. So like if somebody asks you, makes a request of you, and you check in with yourself and you feel crummy and you start to feel stressed out, having to work this request into your life. I think that's very informative. That tells you, okay, you feel crummy when you think about having to do this. Should you do it? So you can see how checking in with your emotions becomes a vital survival tool here because it lets you know really how you feel about something.
Somebody calls it the full body yes and the full body no. We know those. It's the in-between ones that are harder to recognize. When you just know it's the right path. You know it's going to feed you. And you have the other one of, nah, not even going there. You will never get me on another deep sea fishing trip again. That's a full body no. I'm not doing it.
You did a first one?
I did. And I will never. I got so sick.
No, I cannot imagine you on a deep sea fish. Are you into fishing?
No, but I'm into making my family happy.
Okay. I see how this happened.
Husbands and sons want to go experience this thing. And it's like, nah, No, I get too sick. There was nothing left back inside of me at all. So no, so some of them are learned responses, like this didn't go well before. It's definitely a no this time. And you just go through these things and you go, where's the balance of keeping, because we have bosses, we have friends, we have family. Whether you have children or not, you have family that could be super close friends that are like your best confidants ever. So there's all these people, and it's those responses of making, we don't want to lose them. We don't want to hurt their feelings. We don't want them to never want to be around us. If we're cranky and grouchy all the time, I don't even want to be around me. So it's learning that balance of when do I like me? When do my family like me? And which one is authentic? I
love having this.
Go ahead.
I love having this conversation with people because it's a common misconception about boundaries and assertive communication that you ever have the ability to manipulate what someone else is going to say. People can and do say no to you all the time. So I practice assertive communication with people like, the example I gave. How would you ask your husband to take out the trash? And there is definitely still an outcome where he says no, and he's allowed to say no. You can use assertive communication every hour of every day and get told no. The practice is using assertive communication, not making someone else do something. So I do talk with a lot of caretakers, and especially women who are like, well, if I use assertive communication, then I will be, hypno mind controlling my family into doing whatever I want. And I'm like, girl, no. Like, I know where that comes from. It comes from you feel pressured by other people to do things for them, but they don't feel the same way. Like, human beings have agency, and they can and will continue to say no to you. I ask my husband to take out the trash constantly, and I use assertive communication, and I do this for a living, and he still tells me no all the time. And that's his right.
There are things that every relationship has bumps. I don't mind them. They remind me of how important that person is to me. And is this little bump really that important? So what if the trash didn't get to the road in time for it to get dumped? There's next week. And it's which relationship is the most important. And talking through that, you do get no's, but you also realize where the importance lies. If it's a no and you're still there, it wasn't as important as the person.
Yes. I think the opposite is also true. I think a lot of times people will start using like assertive communications or boundary setting, and they'll realize, again, emotions are important. They're like, I have to keep setting boundaries with this one friend. Like, they're the number one person in my life that I have to set boundaries with. How important, is this relationship to me? Is this something that's causing me more stress in my life? Like, you see what I mean by that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I love it that you get to choose. Yeah, you don't. It doesn't matter if they're your mom, your dad, your sibling, your son, your best friend, the person, your coworker that sits right next to you. You may not be able to get physical distance from people, but you have the ability to shield and to protect yourself. And when they do the thing that you don't like, practice the response. Because I know we talked about the steps of stress and feeling the emotion and figuring out where we're self-sabotaging and those boundaries being crossed. And you said, ask for help. And I was wondering if we had the rest of the steps that besides feeling the emotion was step one.
So I'd say that it would be feel the emotion, acknowledge and accept it. Don't try and change it. Don't shove it in a box. Don't put it out of your head. You have to acknowledge and accept it because, spoiler, you can't get it to go away. I have yet to meet a human that is capable of stopping feeling an emotion they don't like, because I don't think you can do that. Acknowledge and accept it. Step 1. Do you need to set a boundary? Step 2. Assertive communication to set a boundary. Step 3. I would say step 4 is check in with yourself again. How do you feel now? And I think listening to yourself is very important. After you set a boundary, do you feel really guilty and bad? Or do you feel better and empowered and relieved? I think in the example of someone asks you to do something, you have to set a boundary and say, it's not in my interest. And afterwards, you feel like I don't have to do that thing. Listen to yourself. That's informative. You might feel guilty and the sigh of relief. Pay attention to both.
Yeah. I had a friend that was asking me to do, I can't remember if it was a play or something. And it wasn't that I wasn't interested, but my health, where it was at the time, would not have allowed me to walk the distance that was going to be required to do this. And I didn't tell her the truth. I told her I was too busy. I told her because I didn't want to admit that it was outside of my physical capabilities at the time. And that wasn't the right way to turn it down, because then they don't know that boundary anymore. If I had said, hey, I can't walk that distance. Are there other options? If we had gone through that, I could have gone to the play. I could have gone, had fun. She would have had a companion. But I lied and said, it doesn't fit into my schedule. So what does that do? That leaves the door open for her to come back with another time when, okay, now I have to make up another lie. So I didn't want to admit I had ruined my health.
And that's one of the self-sabotaging beliefs we would have to look at. Do you need to acknowledge that you have limitations that you don't want to acknowledge? Can we reframe this, or is this something you need to grieve? I know a lot of people with chronic health feel like they never grieve the diagnosis of their chronic health. Like you find out your life is going to be different and you're just like, I'm not going to think about or acknowledge that. And it's like, maybe you need to go through like, what is going to change? What am I going to have to give up? What's going to be different? And allow yourself to feel bad about it. I'm not saying convince yourself, reframe that your life isn't going to be different. I'm saying acknowledge and accept it because I think it's real.
Yeah. And so what I feel like has been brought to my attention was that boundary and kind of not using an excuse. I think if we're going to expect other people to be honest with us, we need to be honest with them and not sugarcoat or whitewash, kind of like my granddaughter did. Grandma, it's not my interest. It's something sweet so you know where to navigate in the future instead of leaving a guessing game. I don't want to get asked a million times if I want to go run the marathon, because right now I'm not capable of doing that. And I need to be real with me, because it may have been me I was lying to more than them.
100%. One intervention I really like, and the listeners at home can do this, is practice setting boundaries by picking really easy things to say no to. So I'll be like, this week, I want you to say no 3 times. You go to the coffee shop and they ask, do you want a bigger size? And you say no. Pick something really easy to start with. The lady at the supermarket asks if you want to pay for bags, and say no. Just to practice doing it. And you can learn and teach yourself the lesson that nothing bad happens when you say no.
Yes. I think that is so, it's a training ground. We're here to learn. We're here to grow, and learning to use our words and to be true to who we are is a key to our happiness. And you can't continue to please everybody else. You've got to take time for you. You've got to take time to find who you are and then be able to stay true to that. And when I say that, you're not going to come to a realization tomorrow, this is who I am. We uncover, we grow, we change as we allow ourselves to say no to the paper bag. The next day we can say no to something else. We grow. So our boundaries are going to adjust. Our responses are going to adjust. And that's okay. Because that's life.
Yes. That is life.
So we are at our time. And I don't want to quit because I just have enjoyed this conversation. But Angela, what would you think as closing words of last wisdom? What would you want to tell our listener?
No, I would want to tell them that it's okay to set boundaries, and it's to view it as a journey, like a muscle you have to train that gets stronger over time. And not a switch that you flip and you can suddenly do it.
I wish it was a switch.
Girl, me too.
Because I would go down in that breaker box. I would unplug them all.
Oh my God.
Yes. Yeah. Learn to practice your responses. I think that's one of the things that I got out of this was you just don't say no unless you've practiced it. You don't just respond authentically unless you've practiced it. Pick your practice partner, whether it's your therapist or your coach or your significant other or a friend that's also trying to be more authentic to them. Pick your person that you can practice with and do it, because the more you practice, the better you're going to be. And I keep thinking of more things. I have two sons that are just naturally very athletic, just amazing. They didn't have to try to be one of the best, but they didn't try. And they were only one of the best. They weren't the best. And if you already have that ability to respond and you don't let people down, guess what? You too can get better at it by practice. Practice gives you that trained response instead of a reaction. And anytime that we can respond instead of react, we're giving ourselves the power to control and to be who we are. So thank you, Angela, for coming, helping me to understand some of these boundary things, because I have to set new ones. And, I need to let go of some of the boundaries that I have that cause me to get angry over nothing. So I am going to work on those things, and you have helped me to help identify that. And I'm sure the listener has jotted down some things too. Listener, I am not a medical or mental professional. I am here for entertainment. I love it when I get a professional on that has the wisdom that Angela has. That wasn't past tense. So thank you. And
well, thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. And stay tuned for the next episode.
Are you tired of waking up exhausted? You are not alone. If you're looking to take your life back, let's start with the simple step of adjusting your self-talk. Stay tuned for the next episode with your host, Lara Jane. Remember to follow the show so you don't miss a next simple step that you can use to feel more confident. And please leave an honest review.